What up, brawlers? Welcome back to Throwing Hands. It's Jacob, per usual, and alongside me is, per usual, Daniel Woods. Daniel, how you doing?
Doing great, man. Really the biggest card of the year. We're going to be talking about today, and you got to love that.
Yep, did not disappoint. We didn't preview this fight because these are two newcomers to the UFC, but Kai Kamaka and Tony Kelly put on a nice show. What were your thoughts on this one?
A really good fight. Just what you want to see out of the prelims, especially with newcomers, two guys that came in, made an impact, and looked really good doing it. Obviously, it's early for both of them, but when you look at the numbers, both guys landed 114 significant strikes. That's about as exciting as you're going to get for a fight that goes to decision.
Yeah, definitely. And Kai Kamaka really just won it with the takedowns. I think
Yeah.
5 takedowns, 5 of 5. Had a beautiful fight. So these are two very exciting prospects that I'm sure Dana White will love to see in the future. All right, so to the first fight that we previewed, TJ Brown versus Danny Chavez. Danny Chavez really killed TJ Brown with those leg kicks. What were your thoughts on this one?
Chavez looked so sharp in this fight. It was really impressive. He was quick, but there were still power behind his strikes. You could tell he was stinging TJ Brown every time he caught him flush. And that's the biggest thing that stood out to me is you could tell Chavez came into this fight really hungry. He's 33 years old. He's been fighting for 14 years, and this was his first chance in the UFC. He certainly did not let it pass him by. He went right after TJ Brown, was aggressive with his striking, but didn't get out in front of himself, which is a lot of what we see guys who have been waiting for this opportunity do. They gas out early. They put themselves in a position to get put down early in the fight, and that's not what Chavez did. He was able to keep TJ Brown moving back on his heels, control the octagon, and when he had the opportunity to land big shots, he did.
Yeah, you put it perfectly, and I expected TJ Brown to use more of his ground game. He tried, but Danny Chavez really just showed a lot with his takedown defense. And, I mean, Danny Chavez, powerful kicks, like you said, he looked very good in this fight. So I don't know what's next for TJ Brown. It's really tough for me. What do you think's next?
It is tough because this is a guy that came in with a lot of hype and he's lost back-to-back fights. I think he's the type of guy that still has the potential that the UFC is going to want to keep him on the roster, but it's tough to match him up with somebody. You'd almost think you would grab somebody off the Contender Series to match him up against. That would make the most sense to me, but even then, that's likely going to be somebody coming off of a win. So I don't really know what's next for TJ Brown because I like him as a fighter and I think he has a future in the UFC, but he just has not shown the ability in the octagon that he showed before he came to the UFC.
Yeah, definitely. I think we could see a matchup against Brock Weaver if he would want to move down another weight class. I mean, Brock Weaver coming off a loss. I think that'd be a good matchup for TJ Brown personally. And for Danny Chavez, I don't know. He has a lot of potential. I don't know what's next for him. What would you want? What would you like to see Danny Chavez do?
I think Chavez definitely gets a UFC contract off of this, but I don't really know where to go from here because he's 33 years old and this was his first UFC fight. I'm not sure how they want to match him up moving forward, depending on how they see him in terms of future contendership. He's a guy that, as I said, has been fighting for 14 years. He's got a lot of miles on his body. I'm not sure he's the type of guy we would see as a top 15 contender in the future, but he's certainly someone that has value. I said you may get somebody from the Contender Series to go up against TJ Brown. That may be the next step for Chavez as well. Get somebody with a little momentum behind him coming off the Contender Series, coming off of a big win, and see if Chavez can be the one to kind of, I guess you could say, test their mettle in the octagon for real.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think we could see Danny Chavez be kind of like a prospect tester in this division,
Yeah.
experience. And I think what the young fighters will learn from him is experience. Like this guy's seen pretty much everything. So Danny Chavez has a future in the UFC, I believe. All right. So to a very surprising outcome here with Jim Miller versus Vince Pichel. Jim Miller had 2 takedowns, but the man who dominated on the ground was Vince Pichel, which really surprised me. A guy who's usually a stand-up fighter. What were your thoughts on this one?
I thought Vince Pichel looked really good. He's 37 years old, but what they were saying on the broadcast, and I wasn't really paying much attention to MMA at all when Vince Pichel was on The Ultimate Fighter. But, I mean, you had guys saying that this was the best Vince Pichel has looked since he was on The Ultimate Fighter, and he honestly looked better than when he was on The Ultimate Fighter. I'll take those guys' word for it, but I was really impressed with what he brought to the table. I mean, I like Jim Miller. Jim Miller, as we've said, is one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters in the UFC, in my opinion, when it comes to just pure ability. And Vince Pichel was able to hang with him, able to roll with him on the ground. And when it did go to the feet, he knew he had an advantage, and he was able to handle Miller when it went there as well.
Yeah, definitely. And, when he got on the ground, he reversed Miller's position very well. He had a lot of top control. He had 3 takedowns against Jim Miller, who's a former Division I wrestler, rather. So Vince really showed his dynamic skill set, and he just really looked good. There's really not much to add there for Vince Pichel and Jim Miller. So I think what's next for Jim Miller is he's going to stay that gatekeeper in this lightweight division, like you and I have said the past few weeks. Do you have anything to add to that?
Not at all. That's certainly the role he's slid into, to be able to kind of test guys that struggle with fighters that excel on the ground, I would say.
Yeah, and I think for Vince Pichel, it's a little tough to tell for him. I mean, he hasn't really fought much, so I don't see him getting a ranked guy. If Jim Miller had won, he probably would have gotten a ranked guy, but I don't see anybody in these rankings that he should go against. I think he might get somebody who came high off like the contender series, like Medic. I could see him fighting somebody like Medic. What do you think?
It's really, really weird to think about Vince Pichel right now, because he's a guy that is 37 years old and just had the biggest win of his career. So I think he's certainly got a place in the UFC. Like you said, I'm not sure he's ready for a top 15 guy. I'm not sure that's the type of situation they want to put him in, but somebody kicking around that division, somebody kicking around in lightweight, there's got to be somebody for Vince Pichel to match up with, see if this kind of late career renaissance is for real with him.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So onto the main card, Jon Dodson versus Murad Dvalishvili. Jon Dodson escaped all but 2 of Dvalishvili's takedowns, but Jon Dodson produced next to no offense in this fight. And he just looked off, but Murad Dvalishvili, lots of upside in this guy. What were your thoughts on this fight? What are your thoughts on this fight?
This was a really good fight, I thought, for Murad Dvalishvili. Jon Dodson is certainly a big test, a former flyweight title challenger that's up at bantamweight now. But I thought Dvalishvili looked really good. Like you said, Dodson was able to avoid several takedown attempts, but Murad was still able to land 2 of them, and he looked good on the feet. That's been the thing with Dvalishvili, is he's never really been tested on the feet because he's been able to grind people out when it goes to the ground so much. And he wasn't super efficient with his striking. He only landed 38% of his attempted significant strikes. But he still outstruck Jon Dodson considerably, filled the fight up with a lot of volume, and he was still able to fight his kind of fight. That's what stood out to me, is even when his takedowns weren't working, he found other ways to control the pace of the fight.
Yeah, he fought the way he wanted to. Even if it was standing up, he was pressing the action up against the cage. And in the first round, you saw him clinch Jon Dodson and just kill him with those knees to the legs. And, I mean, Walsh really just fought his fight. And I think that's what was the downside of Jon Dodson. Jon Dodson didn't press the action like he usually does in his fights, and that was his downfall. All right. So what do you think's next for Jon Dodson?
I think, honestly, Dodson, we're going to talk about Sean O'Malley later. That's a matchup I would like to see if Sean O'Malley can get turned around and get healthy. Dodson's obviously a guy that's been around for a little bit. I think he would be a step down from Marlon Vera, and that's the match I would probably make, because Dodson is still a very experienced fighter, has a level of experience that outside of Marlon Vera, Sean O'Malley hasn't faced yet. So they're both guys coming off of losses, and they're both guys looking to prove something.
Yeah, I think you put it perfectly. We could see that Sean O'Malley. And I think for Dvalishvili, I think Dominic Cruz should be his next matchup, personally. Yes, Dominic Cruz is the best bantamweight to ever grace the UFC, but he's old now, but he can still do his stuff. And I think Murad's ground game against Cruz's stand-up game would be a really fun, interesting matchup, and good for Dvalishvili. What do you think?
That makes a lot of sense. I think Dwalishvili is definitely somebody with a lot of momentum moving forward in this division. I'm not sure I would take that much of a step forward. I think somebody around that number 10 range, even Rafael Assunção coming off a loss at number 8 might be a decent matchup for him. I've seen the name Rob Font, who's number 10 in that division, thrown around a little bit. I think that would be a solid test for Dwalishvili. I think Dominic Cruz is number 11, so what am I talking about taking a huge step up in the rankings? But I think someone in that kind of that 8 to 11 range is where we're going to see Dwalishvili, somebody that can give him the opportunity to legitimize himself as a top 10 bantamweight.
Yep. All right. So we summed that fight up quite well. Now, this was surprising. Danny Pineda over Herbert Burns. Danny Pineda controlling the fight on the ground. Now, Danny Pineda is not a bum on the ground by any means. I believe he has he's in the teens with his submissions, and he has a lot more experience than Herbert Burns has. But it was surprising because he just ground and pounded him out. What did you think of this fight?
The story of this fight was Herbert Burns' conditioning, I thought, because he came in overweight. They were talking on commentary that nobody really knew what the cause of him missing weight was, whether it was an injury in training, whether it was a conditioning issue. And it clearly was a problem for Herbert Burns in this fight because Daniel Pineda was just able to keep the pace up on him so much, able to control this fight in terms of speed and location for so much of this fight that Burns was just back on his heels the entire time. And eventually he just ran out of gas. And that's when Pineda was able to get him down to the ground and just finish this with ground and pound. Herbert Burns is obviously an outstanding prospect, but he's going to have to figure out some issues with those weight cuts if he's going to make any kind of big step forward like his brother has.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking he should probably move up a division because he's had a little bit of trouble with
big featherweight.
Yeah, he is a big featherweight, and like you said, he came in 4.5 pounds overweight or something absurd like that. So I think it would be in his best interest for health wise. And now that he's 31, I believe, he's not getting any younger, and I think the weight cut would be a lot easier on his body if he moved up to lightweight. And like you said, he looked off with his conditioning. He didn't spend enough time on the treadmill or anything. So I don't know what's next for Herbert Burns. I think it's tough. I think if he would have won this fight, he probably would have gone into the featherweight division, top 15. So what do you think's next for Burns?
Yeah, that's the thing. This was supposed to be the big step forward for Herbert Burns. This was supposed to be the fight that pushed him into the top 15, and he lost it. So this is a really deep featherweight division. I mean, Jose Aldo's sitting there at number 15, and Shane Burgos 14. This division's ridiculous. But as far as the guys outside that top 15, there's plenty of challengers for Herbert Burns. It's just a matter of how the UFC wants to make that fight.
Yeah, and I think for Danny Pineda, I think, I wouldn't be surprised if they gave him a top 15 matchup because he has a lot of experience since leaving the UFC, and he's won a fair amount in a row. I think 5 of his last 7, but the last 2 have been no contest that have been overturned. So what do you think's next for Pineda?
Yeah, Pineda's definitely going to get another shot. I'm not, like you said, I'm not sure if it's a top 15 guy. It's definitely possible because surprising in this kind of fashion against somebody like Herbert Burns is certainly going to get him further up the radar with Dana White and the other matchmakers. So I think Pineda definitely gets a step forward in competition. I'm not sure exactly who it would be, but he's definitely a guy that has earned an opportunity against what would be considered a fighter, probably a step up in tier in the UFC featherweight division.
All right, so that's all for that matchup. On to besides the main event, the fight I was excited for the most, Junior Dos Santos versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Dos Santos looked good in the first round, but something just fell off in the second round. And then Jairzinho hit him with that straight left, I believe, that took JDS back to the fence and pretty much to the ground. What were your thoughts on this fight?
I picked Rozenstruik in this one. I think he was the favorite coming in, but there was a lot of people saying with the way Junior Dos Santos had been looking in the gym, the way he was preparing for this fight, that he had a really good chance to knock Rozenstruik off. And it looked like in that first round that was going to come true, but Rozenstruik just came out in that second round, and he's always been a very technical kickboxer, very efficient, and he packs power behind it. But Rozenstruik, there was something different coming out of his corner in the second round. It was like it's been said, he has said he learned so much from that 20-second loss to Francis Ngannou, and I think that was evident with the adjustments he was able to make in that second round. He was efficient, he was crisp in his movements, and he was able to counter Junior Dos Santos. That was the biggest thing for me, was largely the sequence that led to him knocking Junior Dos Santos out was a counter strike. That's what started it, and he was just able to stay on his toes a little bit more as Dos Santos came in. He was able to stick him with that counter left and kind of just fill in the gaps from there before the official ended the fight.
Yeah, that's the thing with Rozenstruik. He's always been really good at countering. Even when he was bull rushed by Ngannou in that fight, he landed 3 really nice shots when he was getting bull rushed, when he was getting backed up against the fence. But, Ngannou's just a tank, and you can't really do much about it when it comes to it. But Junior Dos Santos, like we said, he looked very good in the first round, but the corner of Rozenstruik just really helped him out with his adjustments, and it showed when he knocked JDS out. So it's a really interesting situation for JDS. I mean, he's old now, but he's still very, very good at what he does, obviously, and he's probably in the best shape of his career. What do you think's next for him, man?
It's very interesting. I will say that, because he's been around. He's fought just about everybody there is to fight. And he's a former champion. He's done it all, like you said. And he's a guy that's in a position where he's probably not, especially with this loss, he's probably not going to find himself anywhere near title contention moving forward. But he's the type of guy that has a lot of value to the UFC. There's two options that jump to mind for me. I think he's in a point in his career where they're not going to want to match him up coming off a loss with somebody who's already who's coming off a win. So there are two options that jump to mind for me. And the first is Alexei Oleinik, I believe one of the few guys in this division that he has not yet fought. And that would be a really good fight, in my opinion. That would be a good mix of styles, with Dos Santos boxing up against Oleinik's ground game. The other one that came into mind is actually going to depend on a fight that's happening next month. I could also see him possibly getting the loser of Alistair Overeem and Augusto Sakai, especially if Overeem wins that one, because you can take Augusto Sakai coming off of a loss and match him up with Junior Dos Santos. That would be another really good test for Sakai as an up-and-comer. Or if he knocks off Alistair Overeem, you get another Overeem Dos Santos fight, which I'm sure a lot of people would like to see.
Yeah, I think I'd like to see that too. And a lot of these guys from 8 to 11 are fighting each other. We got Sakai and Overeem, we got Volkov and Walt Harris. And Alexei Oleinik's really the only guy available in this division right now, with Rozenstruik presumably jumping Dos Santos 1 to 5. I mean, Cormier's out. So we could see Dos Santos possibly stay in that top 5. So it's a really interesting situation in this heavyweight division, which we'll get to after we review the championship bout. But for Rozenstruik, I think you just got to feel it out with this. I mean, Ngannou's next. Then I think we might see a Blades-Lewis matchup, possibly. It's just a mess in this heavyweight division. What do you think's next?
I think we could see him get the winner of Alexander Volkov and Walt Harris. I think that, as far as just kind of range in this top 15, is the fight that would make the most sense. Obviously, that fight hasn't happened yet. But the winner of Volkov and Harris, and honestly, depending on what happens that Overeem-Sakai fight, he could get the winner of that as well. Again, he's in a position where he can kind of sit back, see who wins these next couple big heavyweight fights, and kind of pick his poison, because for his sake, it's probably not in his best interest, but it's true that just about every spot ahead of him is spoken for. That Francis Ngannou is almost definitely going to get the next shot at Stipe Miocic, and then he's got Curtis Blades and Derek Lewis also ahead of him, who are probably, I would say, that we're going to see a fight between the two of them before the end of the year to determine who's next in the pecking order. So Rozenstruik's in a position where he's probably going to have to take a fight against somebody ranked lower than him just to stay in shape and prove that he can compete in the top of this division.
Yeah, you summed it up perfectly there. All right, to the co-main event, eating OMalley versus Cheeto Vera. I mean, yes. Did you see the video that I sent you?
I've not had the opportunity to watch it, but
Okay,
obviously, yeah.
yeah, I'll explain what happened. So there's this nerve that runs through the back of your leg. O'Malley's leg fell asleep because there's this point in the fight where Cheeto Vera, his foot landed behind his knee, and it probably pinched the nerve. So his whole leg fell asleep, and that's why you saw his foot just roll on the ground a lot. So Sean O'Malley probably isn't too hurt. I saw a tweet earlier that his x-rays came back negative, but they still have to wait for an MRI. So he's probably okay. But, I mean, Cheeto Vera really looked pretty good in this fight, and O'Malley did too. So what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think this was a really good fight. I think it ended up being, until O'Malley got hurt, still a lot more even. I think Cheeto Vera got a lot more in this fight than people were expecting, even before O'Malley had those issues with his leg. I still think at 100% Sean O'Malley would have won this fight, but Marlon Vera is no slouch, and he was able to take advantage of the situation. A lot of times you see guys get injured and their opponents don't really know what to do. They don't really know what to do when they smell blood in the water, and that was not the case for Marlon Vera. He attacked, and he attacked aggressively. He was able to get Sean O'Malley down to the ground, and that finishing elbow was absolutely brutal. I mean, he put Sean O'Malley out in a bad way, and I think it was a really good decision by Herb Dean to step in there with O'Malley already being hurt and Vera in a very dominant position on the ground. I think that was a great stoppage as early as it came.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if that elbow knocked Sean O'Malley out for a quarter second, however long it was, because that was a brutal elbow. And great stoppage by Herb Dean, per usual. All right, so we already talked.
Before we move on real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to bring this question to the table, and it's a little bit off topic.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think that Sean O'Malley has the best walkout music in the UFC? Because I do.
What did he play again?
There's a Goat Talk by J-Rob the Chief.
Yeah, it is good walkout music.
For my money, it's the best walkout music in the UFC.
Yeah, I mean nothing beats a Conor McGregor walkout in my opinion. But
yeah, that's on another level.
Yeah, but hey, Sean O'Malley's just trying to I can't think of the word. Not imitate, but like get the same vibe as Conor McGregor. He's even said that like he's going to be the next thing. So we already talked what's next for O'Malley. Jon Dodson. Do you think what's next for Marlon Vera? It's really interesting.
I think this probably could move him into the top 15 at bantamweight. I think that's a definite possibility. As far as who his next opponent would be, that's a tough question to answer. Maybe it's weird because Vera, a guy I would like to see him matched up with would be Song Yadong, and he just fought him. It was a controversial decision. I don't think they want to go back to that matchup this soon. I would like to see those guys fight again because I think Marlon Vera would come out on top in a rematch. But it's a weird place to be right now because the back end of that top 15 is pretty heavy right now with guys with potential. I mean, 13, 14, and 15 are Song Yadong, Sean O'Malley, and Merab Dvalishvili. So I think Dvalishvili probably is in a position where his next fight is going to be at a level above what Marlon Vera brings. And I don't know that Vera's ready for a top 10 guy. So he probably ends up, I would say, he could even replace Sean O'Malley in the top 15. That may even be likely, but I don't think his next fight is going to be against a top 15 contender.
I think you put it perfectly, so I'm not even going to add anything to that. All right, so to the main event of the evening, this was a really great fight. I think Stipe Miocic fought the exact fight that he needed to fight. He couldn't have fought it any more perfectly. I mean, DC didn't use too much of wrestling. Yes, he got poked in the eye. That was disgusting. I wouldn't suggest looking at a picture, guys. But what were your thoughts on this one?
One of the things that I said when we were previewing this fight last week was if this fight can almost turn into just a traditional boxing match, then Stipe Miocic would walk away still the UFC heavyweight champion. I thought that was the best path for him to win this fight, was to make it almost entirely a traditional boxing match. Again, no matter what happens against Daniel Cormier, he's going to dirty it up. He's going to get the fight up against the fence. He's going to go for takedowns. But if Stipe Miocic could just turn this almost entirely into a boxing match in the center of the octagon, that would be the best way for him to get the win. And for the most part, he did. There was a lot of clinch work up against the fence, but even then, Stipe was in control a lot of the time. I gave Daniel Cormier 2 rounds. I gave him 1 and 4. I know you only gave him 1, but I thought Stipe he fought his fight. He kept it from going to the ground. He didn't let Daniel Cormier get up underneath him up against the fence. So the longer this fight just stayed vertical, the more of a chance Stipe Miocic had to win. And I think he fought the perfect fight, like you said.
Yeah, and when Stipe got him up against us, he just set in those underhooks immediately and just started getting to work with the knees. And therefore, DC couldn't really take him down. And it was just it was a technical chess match in this one. It wasn't just a dirty fight like the 249 with Joanna and Zhang Weili. But it was just Stipe fought the perfect fight. I can't say anything else. And I hope Daniel Cormier's eye just gets better. That was a nasty eye poke. And he was blinded it after. So, I mean, people say karma is a you-know-what, but no one deserves that. It was bad. So I think DC's probably going to stay retired. I hope he does. I don't want his eye to get any worse.
Right.
But for Stipe, it's got to be Ngannou. What do you think?
I would say so. I think we're going to see that match made pretty soon, honestly. I think we see it before the end of 2020 even. I think if Stipe is up for fighting again this year, we probably see that fight somewhere around December even. And if not then, January or February of 2021. I think this fight honestly solves a lot of the issues we've seen at the top of the heavyweight division. Stipe looks as healthy as ever. He looks as dominant as ever, even though he's turning 38 this week. And with DC out, that kind of takes away that, or even if DC doesn't retire completely, completing this trilogy kind of takes away the tie that those two guys had so closely to each other, and it opens up a lot of other contenders to challenge Stipe Miocic.
Yeah, definitely. And what surprised me about Stipe Miocic coming into this fight, I think he looked like you said, he was in his best shape. I think
This was as light as I've seen him look.
Yeah, he was 233, I think, coming into this fight, if I'm not mistaken. And he looked incredible. He was ripped, but he didn't look too ripped. He had enough body fat on him to keep him going, and he was definitely in his best shape. And I can't blame him for that. All right, so to news. What do you got? Do you have anything?
There's not a ton going on. They announced during the card at 252 the main event of a card coming up.
Oh, Aldana versus Holm.
Yeah, Irene Aldana versus Holly Holm. That fight has been rescheduled for October 3rd. But there's another one. There's a light heavyweight main event, and it's slipping my mind. Yeah, right here, UFC Vegas 8. It's going to be a 3-round main event. Anthony Smith against Alexander Rakic.
All right, I like that. Dominic Reyes, I texted you this, signed a fight contract, and I'm curious with whom.
Yes, that'll be very interesting.
I think it is Jon Jones. I personally hope it is. I hope it is. And I know Dana White was talking to Jon Jones earlier, and they're just waiting for his response. So something must be signed between the two.
Do you think if that's the case and Jon Jones wins, that after Stipe and Ngannou too, that he's the next heavyweight challenger?
There's no question. I mean, if you follow him on Instagram, he's been just lifting consistently. He's just trying to get bigger, and Jon Jones at heavyweight is a scary prospect for me because think about it. No weight cut. His energy doesn't drain. And I mean, he's Jon Jones. He's Jon Jones. There's nothing that he cannot do.
I think Jon Jones at heavyweight is terrifying just because of the way he's carried his weight at light heavyweight. His ability to carry muscle and lean muscle at that in that division has been really impressive. And he doesn't lose a step when he bulks up a little bit for fights, which is really impressive to me. I think he's a terrifying heavyweight competitor personally because he's a guy that in terms of length can still match up and honestly probably outdo a lot of heavyweights. And that if Stipe Miocic were to knock off Francis Ngannou again would cause a lot of problems for him because as was discussed throughout the card and in the lead up to it on Saturday, if I'm remembering correctly, they said Sean O'Malley and Marlon Vera both have longer leg reaches than Stipe Miocic.
Yeah.
And they're both bantamweights. So somebody with as much length as Jon Jones, obviously Jon Jones, one of the greatest pound-for-pound fighters of all time, but somebody with as much length as him could spell a lot of problems for Stipe.
Yeah, that is a scary prospect. I think he'd spell a lot of problems for Ngannou. I mean, Stipe
Yeah,
wrestled Ngannou to the ground. I mean, Ngannou's a completely different fighter now, and I believe he's a lot better. But a wrestler the caliber of Jon Jones against Ngannou would just be a problem. DC's a Olympic wrestler, and he's done folk style freestyle and Greco. But I think just a Greco-Roman wrestler the caliber of Jon Jones would just grant huge problems in the heavyweight division. So it's a scary prospect, I think,
yeah.
and we'll see what happens with that. All right, you got anything else?
Most or a good chunk of the UFC 253 cards out. Obviously main evented by Israel Adesanya and Paulo Costa, which is one of my most anticipated fights of the year. That middleweight title fight, because I love both of those guys. But then I'll just run down the rest of the fights that have been announced. Kai
All
Kara
right.
France versus Brandon Royval, Claudia Gadelha versus Yan Xiaonan, Hakeem Dawodu versus Zubair Tuganov, Donald Cerrone versus Nico Price, which I think will be a really interesting fight. Mirsad Bektic versus Eduardo Garagori, Jessica Rose Clark versus Sarah Alpar, Ketlin Vieira versus Marion Renault, Johnny Walker versus Ryan Spann, Jordan Espinoza versus David Dvorak, Casey Kenny versus Haile Alatang, and a fight that I think is really interesting, and a fight that is going to be, it's the last one that's been announced, a fight that is going to be a huge test for a guy that I see as one of the biggest up-and-coming heavyweights. It's going to be Shamil Abdurakhimov matched up against Cyril Gane, and I love Cyril Gane. He's a former training partner of Francis Ngannou. He brings a ton to the table as a wrestler and a striker. He's currently undefeated as a pro, and he's number 15 in the heavyweight division. And fighting such an outstanding wrestler, obviously a guy with a Dagestani background in Abdurakhimov, who at 38 years old has been around for a really long time, has 25 professional fights. I'm really excited for that one. That looks like it's going to be on a prelim.
Yeah, I think this might be the best all-around card. Like the prelims in this one are really strong. So I'm excited for that card. All right. Anything else?
That's it, man.
All
I'm
right.
excited I'm excited, really excited for 253.
Yes, I am. I'm excited for everything leading up to it. All right, man. Thanks for coming back on, per usual.
Yes,
All right.
sir.
All right, guys. We'll see you for a preview of Fight Night Munoz versus Edgar.